Hey, YouTube. I've learned today I should watch the camera, but today I want to talk about a YouTuber, JayzTwoCents. He has got more than 4 million subscribers. So he's obviously doing something properly and better than I am. But he is touching on a topic I know something about. And he makes certain claims that illustrate basically that he is not an expert on data or file recovery. And he doesn't claim to be, so that's fine. But when you're not an expert on something, you maybe should not be high profile about something, if you know what I mean. If you don't know a lot about the ins and outs of data recovery and file recovery, maybe even though you succeeded in recovering files for someone, maybe you should refrain from start advising other people on the topic. You could say, I recovered some files for somebody and I used Recuva. This is fine. But if you're gonna make a video about it, you're bound to say stupid stuff because you don't know a lot about the topic. And I don't mean this disrespectful. I mean this as an observation in general. Okay, so no beef with JayzTwoCents. I'm just going to address a couple of points. Recuva first. Let's get this out of the way. I don't use Recuva. I use more expensive, advanced software to recover data. But it doesn't mean Recuva is useless, or Recuva can never be useful, or Recuva can never recover data. There's a place for Recuva. Recuva is basically an undelete utility, and it can work with reasonably intact file systems. I will argue that what we're dealing with here is not a reasonably intact file system, so it's not something where you should use Recuva. But again, Recuva is fine. Undelete utilities are fine. I made simple undelete utilities myself. I wrote these less successful than Recuva, I admit that. But nonetheless, it's a FAT and NTFS file undeleter. So I know what I'm talking about. I've also developed more advanced file recovery tools. I've developed disk repair, partition repair, file system repair tools. I have developed file recovery tools myself. I've been involved in other projects, so I know what I'm talking about. You can believe me or you can choose not to believe me, but okay. Where was I? Points, Recuva, okay, Recuva. So Recuva is fine, but not for this. I will talk about it later. If we go to the video in chronological order, the first thing that I noticed is JayzTwoCents basically illustrating that he doesn't really know much about the topic. Because at time mark 5:15, I cannot let this slide. This is misinformation, and people keep parroting this misinformation, and they shouldn't. Let's listen.
Format it now? No, never say that, because anything that was on there that you could potentially get will be gone.
This is good. Whenever a file system is damaged, Windows may prompt you to format it. And you don't ever want to do this. Some people run into situations with Recuva, for example, where Recuva will not scan the drive because it does not recognize the file system. This is not the case in this video, and people will start reformatting the drive in order for Recuva to work with the partition. But formatting is destructive. Formatting basically, at least partially, destroys the file system metadata. But if we consider SSDs or other trimming drives, SMR drives, formatting will trigger trim, and basically it will make your data unrecoverable with Recuva, but also with more advanced tools. Basically, you may have a chance if you set the drive to a data recovery lab where they can bypass the controller, or they can switch the controller to a factory mode, a techno mode, and can persuade it by loading custom loaders into the hard drive's RAM. A technical story, but they can bypass this controller tendency to return 0 filled sectors without even reading the drive, and they can actually persuade it to read the drive and get the data. But that's another story. But you never want to allow the drive to be formatted if you want to recover the data from it. It may sometimes work, you may get away with it, but it doesn't mean it's a good idea. And I've seen people advise it in forums to others. This is stupid. You should never do that if you don't know basically what you're talking about. If it's an SSD or a trimming SMR drive, the data will be gone and out of reach for any file recovery utilities, even if you pay $800 or something like that for UFS Explorer Professional or RStudio Professional. These are expensive tools, but they don't stand a chance against trimmed data. If we continue, however...
Now, there are ways to recover it even after a low-level format, but...
Even after a low-level format. And this is where it shows that he doesn't really know what he's talking about. No one can recover data after a low-level format. Low-level format is basically today, because you as a user cannot do a true low-level format. Basically, it's done in the factory. But basically, if you use a low-level format utility nowadays, it is a zero filler. It basically fills the drive with zeros. It's overriding data with zeros. And yeah, there's people that claim, okay, yeah, you can recover that because there is a residue magnetic, whatever. But basically, it's a nonsense story. I mean, if you, for example, want to read about this, look for the Journal of Digital Forensics, blah, 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 blah. Basically, they use sophisticated, this is a study, this is a meta study, basically. They refer to studies that where scientists used sophisticated equipment, electron microscopes, and this is not my expertise either, but they basically looked at the orientation of the magnetic green and tried to recover the data this way. And they did this on drives, pre-2000 drives, because basically they stayed on a modern drive with the densities we find nowadays on drives. You don't send a chat. So let's try this on a older drive where these areas aren't as densely packed as they are today. And I always think this is a nice illustration, looking through a MFM microscope and interpreting the image they obtained. They basically took this text, and this is what they were able to recover by interpreting the magnetic information, the flux patterns, and knowing the decoding algorithms the drive used, because it's not storing directly zeros and ones. It goes to encoding to avoid worst case patterns and all that stuff. Okay, so but basically this is what you get. You see it on the screen. There is no way to recover low-level formatted data. On SSD, what may happen if you do a zero fill or low-level format is that there is some SSDs are over provisioned. So it basically means if the drive advertises 1 terabyte, you will have 1.1 terabyte or 1.2 terabyte real memory, because it needs this wiggling space in case you fill the drive to the brim. It still needs to have space to do garbage collection. But so you may be able to get little fragments of data that are not actually overwritten, because you only overwrote 1 terabyte. If you would zero fill it 2 times, the chances are practically 0. And if you do it 3 times, it becomes less and less and less. With again, those tools I mentioned before in Data Recovery Labs, you can access this over provisioned space if you want it. Okay, but this was the first thing that I thought, why does he say things like that? People will, he has got 4 million followers, people will start parroting it, and it's just misinformation. Now, the other thing is that he is showing us, let me see it, yeah, here. Let me see if we can get a clear picture. Yes. Basically, what he has is a SSD, and he takes it out of the Asus motherboard from the guy he's recovering the data from, and he puts it in a different motherboard. But I think, I don't have much experience with it, but I think what we're looking at is a Intel Optane SSD. And an Intel Optane SSD is, how do I say it? Basically, it's 2 drives working as one. If the SSD is used in a motherboard that supports Optane, and it needs to be configured to work as Optane. And if you do not do these things, so if you stick it in a motherboard that does not know what Optane is, it will see 2 drives. The 2 drives you see here has nothing to do with the partitioning, as JayZ assumes. It is because he stuffed it into a motherboard that doesn't know what Optane is, or is not configured to treat the drive properly. And basically, these Intel Optane SSD can be configured to present themselves as one drive, but the let's call it the Optane part, the smaller part, the smaller partition here, it's only 30 gigabytes, is basically some super duper quick, fast memory, and it has intelligence baked in so that it will write hot data to this super duper fast area. So you have quick access to data you frequently use, and stuff that sits on your drive for months can sit on slower memory, basically. And something that is very hot is the MFT on an anti-fast file system, for example. So this will end up being written to this super duper fast memory. What he is doing by scanning the E drive is letting Rikuva in this case find the MFT. So as far as Rikuva is concerned, it finds all this data because the MFT is like a database referring to files, referring to areas on the hard drive, and storing the file name and storing the size and storing the allocation. So Rikuva may find a lot of things. The not so hot data is not actually on the drive that he is scanning, but it's on the other drive. And if the Optane is correctly configured, the computer can access that, but not in this case. So he says he recovered stuff, but that must be other hot stuff then that accidentally is on that same super duper fast area. Because usually if you want to recover data from drives like these, you need software that can virtually reconstruct this Intel Optane mechanism. You can see this as sort of like a RAID array where you need all drives, or if there is some redundancy, you can do with all drives except one or two. It depends on the RAID level, but assume the simplest form of RAID, like RAID 0 or a disk span. Basically, this is a disk span. You need all drives to recover the data. And we went there quickly. If you went to UFS Explorer, basically it takes their most expensive software to reconstruct this Intel Optane array and allow you to recover the data, not by coincidence like JayZ maybe did, but because it reconstructs a valid virtual file system from those two drives. So this is the other thing that I noticed. The two drives made me go like, this looks like it could be an Optane drive, and he's not treating it as such. And he basically makes up this story that it's because there are separate partitions, but separate partitions are still normally on one horizontal bar. These are two horizontal bars, and this is how Windows shows you two separate physical drives. So the Optane drive presents itself as two physical drives, which basically normally, when properly configured, work in a RAID-like fashion. Yeah, we see, I mean, I don't know if it per se has something to do with it, but if we look at the results of further on, of Rikuva,
See what they.
he gets almost all these red blips, meaning these files are again probably the recovery chances are very poor, and basically this can be due to the Optane thing, but also I didn't see him use, like I said, Rikuva is basically an undelete utility, and it normally does not bother itself with files in the file system that are not flagged as deleted. In NTFS, for example, file deletion is simply a flag in the MFT entry that represents I'm in use or I'm not in use. If you delete a file, it will go to not in use. It does some other things like updating the bitmap so that the clusters allocated to the file are no longer flagged in use. But it does not, Rikuva normally ignores existing in use files. So you would have to specifically configure it to scan for non-deleted files. I don't know if he did that. Yeah. So, okay, let's assume he recovered the files for his friend. Great. But that is merely a coincidence. We should not, because this happened, make a video that this is the way to recover such data, is my point. He would be better off talking to someone who can really explain him what is happening, because I'm not an expert on Optane. NTFS I know in and out. I mean, I can, if you need me to, I can decode a MFT entry with a hex editor from raw hex. But he should have, for example, talked to the guys from UFS Explorer or some other high-grade file recovery tool, and should have discussed it with them, and this would have made an interesting video, I think. So I'm ambivalent. Is that a word? If this is a good idea, this video of JayzTwoCents. I mean, it's you could say it's nice of him to share his experience, but of course he is a commercial YouTuber. He needs exposure, he needs content, and this is content. But it's not the best content he made, probably. I hope I'm making sense. Leave in the comments if I'm not making sense. I can try to make a more structured, more coherent story. But for now, I think this has taken long enough. This is my okay. Yeah. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like it, you can leave a like. You can subscribe if you like. And I do thank you for that. Bye bye.